For this last session of the 2024 Widening the Pipeline Fellowship, we've come full circle. And the message that I'd like to share with all of you as we conclude is, let your life have many full circle moments when you can look back over the years and realize, I've made good friends, I've made good connections, and I've supported someone along the way. So, picture it, 1992, I arrive at the Detroit Free Press newspaper. I'm in the features department. And there's a program called the Apprentice program for high school apprentice journalists. And I am, I think I was, me and Robin Gavon, I don't know if you know that name, she's a feature. We were the two African-American staffers on the features department, and Anderson. But there was this group of young, talented, eager, wonderful high school kids that I got to know. And they kind of gathered around me like little ducklings. But one of them was Jamel Hill. And one of them was Tanya Mosley, who is now with Fresh Air. Another one was Jamila Robinson, who's the editor of Bon Appetit magazine. Another one was Jonna Berry, who's now the CEO of Mother Jones. Think of the incredible talent. And in that midst was this young lady. She wore glasses and she was just, she looked exactly the same. I mean, she's got the same face, but she just had these glasses. And she was so earnest. And she was so serious about wanting to be a journalist. Well, that young teenager became Lesli Foster. She is the evening anchor, weeknight anchor for WUSA Channel 9 in D.C. Lesli, it is such a thrill to welcome you to Widening the Pipeline.
I am so excited to be here, really thrilled. This is like, so I'm fangirling because Rachel was always that one for me and for so many of us. So I'm super excited to be here. And we have been together for a very long time. I mean, she saw me with she's like underestimating how big these glasses were. They were like half of my face. So, yeah.
But I think this also feeds off of our last conversation, authenticity. When an authentic energy reaches out to you, you respond. And with each of the women that I mentioned, including Lesli, they were just authentically eager about their why in journalism. Boris Sanchez talked about that yesterday. So last year, at one point, Lesli called me and said, the anniversary of the Crown Act is coming up. And she wanted to run something by me. She wanted to talk about the issue, obviously, and I think Maryland was one of the first states to to enact it. But she wanted to maybe do more than just make a statement. So I'm going to let you take it away from here, and then we'll continue the conversation.
I wanted to have a little more skin in the game. So you all have heard a lot about authenticity and bringing your full selves to your experience. And that has been something I've tried to make a career of on my own. And it hasn't always been easy. But I am at a point in my career where I would say there are more peaks now than valleys. So I have a little more agency. And one of the things that I wanted to do with the Crown Act was to be a lot more invested in what it meant to be your full natural self on the air. And I had never done anything outside of put chemicals in my hair or straighten my hair, because the message to women like me had always been that in order to be beautiful and marketable and credible and professional, you had to come in this way and look this way. So I stopped putting chemicals in my hair many years ago, but I still blow dry it. Obviously, it still is straightened in some way, but I wanted to do something different. I wanted to wear my hair in braids, and I knew that the law existed, right? So it wasn't a question about the law and whether I could do it. It was sort of, should I do it? And so, like any great mentor that hopefully you have, and hopefully you're making a great mentor out of Rachel, I called Rachel because for as long as I've known Rachel, she always walked in as her full self. And she walked in unapologetically, and she walked in confidently. And I said, can I do this and do it authentically? I'm not going to wear my hair in braids all the time. So I didn't want to misrepresent my intention. But I did want to show up and say in a different way, I want to affirm my sisters, my brothers who show up in the workplace, in various workplaces, and show up in my full unchemicalized self. So we talked about it, and I said, I just don't want someone to perceive me as not being authentic. And Rachel said, but your intention has always been around authenticity, and you can't worry about what other people think. I think it's a great idea, and I think you should do it. So I could have just shown up at work with braids in my hair, but if you know anything about television, you know that we have contracts, and contractually, they contracted with this Lesli. So if I were to show up and make a radical change to this Lesli, I kind of need to tell them that I'm going to do that. It would be like if you hired this Lesli, but then I showed up like Halle Berry with a really, really short haircut. Two very different things. And television is a commodity life. And so any of you who know anything about television, we are a commodity, right? We are not, as I like to describe to young people in the business, don't get it twisted, right? Someone can come in here tomorrow and tell you this is your last day. So I really think you need to be about the business of being the best version of who you are. So that carries you throughout your career, beyond this whole idea of what it means to be a commodity. So we go back to the Crown Act, and my news director at the time is an Afro-Latina woman. And I also know how rare that is. And so I wanted to make sure that this woman who has backed me and supported me in my career, that I gave her a heads up that this is something that I'd like to do. And she said, I'd love it. But I think we should do more than just have you show up in braids. Why don't we do more? Why don't we have a conversation? And from there, we talked about bringing in women who had had discriminating experiences because of the way they wear their hair. And so we brought 3 women who had experienced hair discrimination together with 3 of us who were on the air. And 3 of us who were on the air at the station have had 3 varying different experiences around our hair. One of my colleagues, Allison, her hair is naturally curly, but she chooses to straighten it because she just didn't want to have any questions about her hair. And so that's been her journey, and she's always worn her hair straightened, even though it's naturally curly, and she wears her hair that way on the weekend. Another one of my colleagues, Delia, decided to go gray. And when having those kinds of conversations with the ageism that kind of comes into play in this industry, again, reminding you that this is a commodity, right? So do you check these boxes? Do you look a certain way? Can we market you? Delia decided, you know what, I'm going to transition and wear my hair in its authentic state. So I'm going to wear my hair gray. And for me, it was coming in and saying, listen, I want to wear my hair in braids. So we put all 6 of us together at a hair salon in Montgomery County, Maryland, which was the first locality in the nation to adopt the Crown Act. California was the first state to pass it. There have been 20 states that have passed it since then, and about 40 localities across the country. And we had a great conversation, an honest conversation about what it means and what we've experienced. And we invited Will Jawando, who is a local councilman from Montgomery County, to come in and talk about his own hair experiences and why this was so important for him. You will get to see this because we'll send you the link and you can watch it at your leisure. It's 49 minutes. We don't have time to do all that right now. But I'll give you the backstory for him. He has 4 children and 3 daughters, and they would say to their mom, well, we're not pretty like the girls who wear their hair straight. And so for him, that was an arresting moment as a father, raising young, Black, beautiful girls in a community and in a world that hasn't always affirmed that. So all of that was really the backstory for what we chose to do. And Sydney, if you don't mind playing just the first few frames, and maybe, is it okay for me to sit here or should I step aside? Okay. So you'll see how we introduce the conversation, and then maybe we'll just show just a quick little sliver of what it looked like in the hair salon so that you can see the contrast between the two. Okay, we can roll it now. July 3rd is National Crown Day, which is why you see me wearing my crown a little differently. It commemorates the passage of laws across the country that ban race-based hair discrimination in the workplace and in K-12 public and charter schools. CROWN stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. I sat down recently to talk about this vision and share hair stories with some women you know and women I can't wait to introduce you to. So thank you for joining us as we go in conversation on the Crown Act. Thank you all for being here today and for holding space for this courageous conversation. We thought that since we're talking about the Crown Act, and we're talking about what it does to outlaw hair discrimination, that we could start with the law itself. And so we invited Will Jawando, Montgomery County Councilman, to talk with us about this. We're sitting in Montgomery County, which is the first locality in the nation. You could stop it now. So it seems appropriate to be here. So that was sort of how we started it. And we broke up our conversation into 4 different segments, one at 5, one at 6, one at 11, and then this became the larger conversation to really kind of help educate people about the Crown Act. And no one at work knew except my colleagues who were sitting here with me and my bosses. So when I walked in, people walked past me and then they stopped and they were like, "Lesli, is that you?" So it was really kind of one of those moments that you don't forget in your career. That was, to me, pretty affirming to have had the opportunity and the agency to do this kind of thing here in Washington. And then some of my colleagues came back after and said, you know, there are other people in the market who said they were watching and they wished that they had people who supported them in the places where they were working now that would give them the opportunity to do this kind of thing. And so I hope that for all of you on your journey, it may not be the Crown Act that is the thing where you're able to bring your full self to work. Maybe for you, it's the kinds of stories that you pursue. And so when we talk about a crowning moment, a moment where you feel affirmed, I hope that all of you have those in your career. I understand I'm going to be working for some of you at some point in my career. So I hope that as leaders and future leaders in both the journalism ranks as reporters or anchors or whatever you decide to do, or managing editors or executive producers, or eventually becoming like a Rachel Jones, having had many of those experiences, and then you're on this side mentoring others. I hope that you are able to find your own crowning moment in your careers where you can really hang your hat on something and feel positive about it and feel like you've really gone the distance, not just for the people who we serve as we cover them, but for our own lives. And Rachel and I have talked about this. I really think we are in the business of humanity, and it is hard to do justice to this business when you haven't found your own voice. So I would say to each of you, find out who you are, most importantly, because when you know your own truth, you can help affirm someone else's truth. And so Lesli, the journalist who was young and in her 20s, probably couldn't have done this because I wasn't there yet. I hadn't fully found my own voice. I wasn't fully tapped into who I was as a woman, as a human, as a being, as a mother, as a friend, as someone who sees the humanity reflecting back at me. I think in order to really be the best journalist you can be, you really have to understand the person that you are. That is how you, I think, cover communities well. And that is how you understand nuance. And that is how you can protect the people that you cover. That is how you can go into communities that feel underserved and say, I hear you, I honor your voice, I'm going to respect that voice and do all that I can to make sure that I channel it in the best way that I can. So I'm happy to talk a whole lot more about these crowning moments and authenticity, but this was just one of them. But I would say the important work that you need to do, in addition to what you're learning here, is the work that you do about you, so that you understand when you show up to talk to somebody, how do I respect this person? How do I honor their humanity? How do I honor their place in the world, whether it is a walk that you've had together or not? How do I understand different viewpoints? And a lot of that starts with who you are.
To that end, the conversation we had with Boris yesterday really opened all of us up in that regard. He's talked about his why he does journalism. And the most powerful moment or aspect of that was when he talked about his grandfather, who was a political prisoner in Cuba and had been tortured and imprisoned, etc. And he brought us to a moment in the White House briefing room where he's asking a question of President Biden, and President Biden is pointing to him and responding to the question. And it was in that moment that he said, I'm doing this for my grandfather, who couldn't speak out, who was tortured for speaking his mind about the policies. Such an incredible moment for him. So can you share with us your why? What is it that motivates you?
I think I've always been driven to the stories that we haven't heard. And I think some of that comes from having a mother who helped to integrate schools outside of Detroit after Brown versus Board of Education, and the kinds of conversations that we didn't have with my mom growing up really early, I'm having with her now because of how important and how foundational what she did was for all of us. And so I think about like my mom's story and the conversations that my grandparents had with her at the time, which was, listen, we are here in Detroit. My grandparents migrated from Louisiana. They were part of the Great Migration to Detroit, hoping for a better life. And they started a business, and my grandmother was an educator. But they realized that the schools in Detroit, because of the segregation at the time, were not fully able to, in their mind, give my mom the best educational start. And they wanted her to have that. So they talked with her about how would you feel about going to live with some friends of ours outside of Detroit and having the opportunity at a better education there. And it was a big conversation because my grandparents had to give their friends custody of my mom during the week. And then she would come back to Detroit on the weekend. And so the conversation was, can you do this? Do you feel like you're strong enough to do this? Because you're walking into a school where you're the first. And a friend of hers, whose name was Brenda at the time, would have been going with her. So they would have had each other, but they would have been the first Black students here. And it was a tough road for them, as you can imagine. There were teachers who didn't want them there. There were parents who never talked to them the entire time they were there, including when they graduated. There were conversations of, trying to make new friends. And she told me about a friendship she had with a young classmate whose uncle or father was part of the KKK. And she remembers when she learned that at the friend's house and said, okay, it's time for me to go. And so I think about the stories of the many people who were in situations just like my mom's, whose stories that we don't know. And that for me was really my why. And that is what helped to guide me. Sometimes people tend to gravitate towards what's happening, and I gravitate toward what's not happening. Whose voices aren't we hearing? Whose stories don't we know? And that my mom will always, for me, I think, be a standard bearer because of what she underwent. And what she said to me is part of the reason why she wanted to become an educator was so that she could teach young people that hate is not something that you were born with. Hate is something that you're taught. And for her, the antidote for hate was love. And for her, she channeled that through classrooms. And so these were stories that we didn't hear a whole lot about growing up. I didn't ask my mom a ton about it. It really wasn't until recent years when I've had the opportunity to excavate the stories of other people in other families that I've said, Mom, let's go back and talk about this. Let's talk about how you felt in the moment. And I think it's really important for us, and Rachel was so gifted at this at the time, that we get beyond points of time, like we just say a civil rights era, or we say enslavement, or we say someone integrated a school, and get to the heart of the matter. And that's really the stories behind these things that happen. This is how we help to recalibrate history and help people understand the things that perhaps have been uncomfortable for them, which is reminding them that there was once someone in a classroom sitting just like this who didn't look like all of us, who had to make a way for someone, who made it possible for all of us to do what we do today. So I always tend to gravitate to the stories that we haven't heard, to hear the voices we haven't heard. I was telling Rachel, people always ask me, what's your favorite story? And I always say, it's the story I'm working on. And so the stories that I'm working on now are about a community in Potomac, Maryland called Scotland. And people drive by it every day, but you wouldn't know their story unless you stopped to hear about it. So there's a church on the side of the road that in 2019 flooded. And essentially, the very foundation of it was nearly knocked off because of this water. But part of the reason why this church flooded is because the county, Montgomery County, where this church is, really wanted it to be that way. This was land that was purchased after people were newly freed in the county back in the 1880s. A gentleman by the name of William Dove bought some of the first acres of land there, and the community of Scotland grew to own about just over 500 acres. From 1880 to now, it has been really dwindled down to about 10 acres. And part of it is because the county wanted the land and developers wanted the land, and they knew that these people were not educated, and so they began to systematically take their land away by either tricking them into telling them, oh, we'll build this road for you, oh, we'll create this easement that'll make it easier for you. They built a road which was higher than the church. And then they built homes behind the church that were higher than the church. So what happens when the church is down here and the road is up here and the houses are up here? It means all that water comes in and creates a bathtub and tries to essentially push the church, which is the heart of this community, out of the way. So you fast forward, and this community has decided we are not going anywhere. The descendants have said, listen, we are not going anywhere. And somebody happens to drive by this church and they wonder, what happened to this church? And that somebody just happened to be Mitch Rales, who is now one of the owners of the Washington Commanders. And he decides, as he learns the story and thinks about the parallels in his own life, that no one should drive by this church and not know this story. And so he teams up with this family to help raise money to raise the church. They need like $10 million to raise the church so that it's still there. But in telling this story, there's so many other parts of it, so many other people who have been part of saving this community in the past. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's fascinating and there's lots of places to go with it. But there are 4 stories of this journey that we're going to tell next week. So any of you who know what it's like to work on a multi-part series where there's all these people editing and all these people who need to have their hands in the pot, that's where I am knee deep in that this week, which is super duper exciting. But it's another one of those things where I tend to gravitate where people don't always go. And while the story of Scotland has been told in some parts, by and large, this very significant part of American history, which you'll learn about in the stories, has not been told. So I think that for all of us here, and particularly for all of us in this room, we have this added responsibility to get it right for communities that look like ours. And no one's going to tell you that, but you know from going to the awards ceremony last night for Widening the Pipeline and National Foundation, a National Press Foundation, hearing the stories of the Dorothy Gilliam Butlers of the world. When you hear those stories and you think of the journeys that they've had in their respective news organizations and how they made it possible through blood, sweat, and tears and everything else they endured, for us to do these incredible, to be part of the incredible work that we're able to be part of now, and to have the honor of sharing the stories of people and helping to inform and inspire and make an impact. I think that we definitely have to do even more to ensure that our communities, which largely still in many cases are undercovered and underserved, are illuminated, that our contributions are illuminated, that our lives are illuminated, that these stories are illuminated. And as we look at how history is under attack and how the truth is under attack in this country, part of the way we push back is by telling the truth and sharing the truth of communities that people don't necessarily want to hear, but they need to.
Another way that you were so boldly authentic and you seized the moment was when you did the feature about Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and about the issue of
prostate cancer.
Tell them about that.
Yeah, so obviously we all know the defense secretary ended up in the hospital and he had prostate cancer, and everybody was kind of going back and forth about who should have known what. And my experience as someone who has a husband who survived prostate cancer and a grandfather did not, was that this diagnosis can be life-changing, in particular for African American men who are often diagnosed later in more progressive stages of prostate cancer. And so I thought, wow, to me, like everybody's going back and forth about who should have known what and what did the president know. And I'm like, but actually the missed opportunity here for the defense secretary was really to kind of talk about prostate cancer in general and the fact that he's alive today because he has this diagnosis. And so as we talk about things in our editorial meeting, and so everybody's editorial meeting is different. Ours is a little kind of wonky and crazy sometimes when we do it between the end of the 6 and the 11. So we have editorial meetings for the early shows, and then we have the Keeping It Real editorial meeting that happens at 6:30 for the 11 o'clock show. And we kind of talk about these stories in a different way. And because some of our colleagues knew about my own journey with prostate cancer, they said, well, why don't we, and I was like, hey, I was thinking the exact same thing. Why don't we do something about prostate cancer and helping to educate people about prostate cancer, in particular Black men who feel really uncomfortable about going to have their prostate checked. And so when my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I went in the newsroom and I was like, have you had your prostate checked? Have you had your prostate checked? Have you been to the doctor? And they're like, ew. And I'm like, do you think we actually want to go and have these checks done too? This is about you being here. So I say all of that to say, we thought the moment to really crystallize this for people and help them understand why what is happening with the defense secretary really impacts not just the upper tiers who should have known about where he was and what was happening with him. How about we use this opportunity to help educate people and perhaps save a life? Maybe somebody may say, you know what, Dad, have you had your check? Maybe someone will say to their husband, honey, have you had your check? Maybe somebody will say to their brother, we need to do a follow-up because when you had that check, you needed to go back and have something checked. So for me, authenticity comes through, I think, in ways where we look at opportunities to show a shared thread, a connective thread. And many people may not have seen a connective thread with the defense secretary, but they could certainly relate to this idea of someone being diagnosed with cancer, and certainly for Black men with prostate cancer, and also understanding that this is a cancer that is highly survivable if it is diagnosed early. So maybe by sharing this story in a different way, people will think differently about their humanity. Again, you keep hearing me say humanity and connectivity to people. How do we find a way to make these stories connect with people in a way that maybe they didn't before? And that was how we tried to kind of thread the needle there.
I think I sent you guys that clip. If I didn't, I will send it later. But just very powerful.
Oh, and I should say at the end of it, Rach, when we were having this conversation, and I didn't know this, and this is why conversations are really important. Our sports anchor, who is new to us but not new to the market, was in the conversation when we were having it and said, hey, I am a prostate cancer survivor, which none of us knew at the time. So I said, okay, what if we do this and at the end of it, you come out and we talk about the fact that it's so important to share this because you're here, right? You are someone who has survived prostate cancer. So that's why I think don't miss an opportunity to bring your full self to the organizations that you work for and to connect with people, because you never know someone else's story and you never know how you'll be able to bring their story into the fold as well.
One more question before I open it up to the fellows. We also talked a lot over the past few days about being strategic, about knowing when to push an issue and when to sort of manage it. And you told me about this conversation you had with this Tegna executive at a dinner. We don't have to get into details, but talk a little bit about how you had to work through your feelings about what happened and what you decided to do about it.
So let me go back a second, because you will find that there are people on your journey who will think they can just say anything to you. Just anything. And I'm not going to name this person, and we'll come back to that conversation. But I had a news director at the time who was in many ways supportive. But could you imagine someone ever saying this to you? He pulls me in the office and he says, I think we need to roughen you up. Now I have your attention. You went to the right school, you pledged the right sorority, your hair is always this, you're doing all like that. But I don't know that people really connect with you. So no one has ever said that to me, ever. People always say, oh, I feel like you're so warm, I feel so connected, blah, blah, blah. So I'm listening to this. And he says, I'm just not sure our viewers connect with you. And I said, oh, wow, I have actually never, ever heard anyone say this to me. Can you give me some examples of what you're talking about? And he said, well, our viewer, they're busy moms. The kids are on the soccer field. And I'm like, well, I'm a busy mom and my kid's on the soccer field. And he's giving all these descriptions that are me. And so in that moment, Detroit Lesli, who is quite different from this Lesli, is kind of like, so am I taking these off? Are we doing this? Because we could, but maybe we shouldn't. And I thought about that moment, and I shared with you my mom's story of integrating a school and how important education was, and how important education is foundationally to people who look like me, who for years and decades had not had access to quality education. It was against the law to read and write. And so you would sit across from me and say to me, right, we need to roughen you up. What are you thinking about? And how are you using your words? Words are so very powerful, right, as we know, because people are battling over words right now. Words in books, words in phrases, words that tell the truth, words that you don't want to hear because they make you uncomfortable. So I'm sitting in an office with someone who clearly has more power than me, who is trying to, in some ways, diminish my own power. And I thought to myself, well, the only person I know how to be is me. And the only voice I know how to have is this one. So I walked out of that office and said, later for that, I'm going to do me. I'm going to be me. I've been at this station for 23 years. And this is the thing, I think, that hopefully has kept me here. This voice I have. This energy I've tried to channel, the humanity I've tried to bring to the role that I have. So we fast forward a little bit, and I'm in another one of these situations that I can't really get myself out of, where someone is sharing some thoughts with me that they thought were meant to build me up. But first, this person decided to take me all the way down to the ground. You know that feeling where you feel like someone has undressed you in front of people? This is the feeling it was giving me, because this wasn't a conversation that I was allowed to have with this person sort of one-on-one. This was a conversation had where I was essentially being undressed to be built back up in front of people. and they had to hear the conversation. And so it was an interesting thing to navigate, and it reminded me of how there are going to be people on your journey who will try you. They will try your patience. They will try to get at the heart of you. If I was a different human, that might have broken me. And so I want to prepare you all for those times when you are up against the wall and you can't leave a situation and you can't walk away from something because someone in power is speaking to you what they think is the truth of you. And so that's why I think it's so important for all of you to spend some time really investing in making sure that your scaffolding and your infrastructure is strong. Your personal infrastructure is strong. Because what we don't want to happen is the important work that you're doing out there and the champion you need to be for so many people. You're going to confront challenges within your own ranks sometimes that will make you question your abilities. And so I want you to spend time making sure that your foundation, your own foundation, is strong. So that when you come away from these conversations, you can say, who does this person think they are talking to me this way, right? You may not be able to articulate it in that moment, but you can certainly say to yourself, oh, no. This person does not know who I am. They do not know the power that I have. They don't know how I empower others. They don't know how I go to bat for others. They don't know how I'm going to even go to bat for them, because I'm going to make sure that what I've got right here is so strong it cannot be broken. So that's what I want to make sure that you all have, because there's going to be a moment in your career when someone is going to try you. They're going to try to see what you're made of. They're going to try to see if they can break you. And they may not know that's what they're doing, but we all know these things, right? We have language for it now. I guess they call it microaggressions. But I didn't always know what the words were for the words all the time. But we know what those words are now. And so I want to make sure that all of you on your journey are strong, are cemented in your beliefs, in what you won't compromise. I want to make sure that you know that you can speak up and stand up for yourselves in moments of crisis, in moments that are uncomfortable. And I think it's important for you to get there, because as you continue your purpose-driven work, when people may try to keep you from doing your work, they may try to keep you from getting the answers, they may try to put roadblocks in your way, you have got to be strong enough to keep going. You've got to be resilient. You've got to be tenacious. You've got to be kind. You've got to stand up for yourself sometimes. And sometimes you have to say to people, you will not talk to me this way. So of all the lessons that you've learned, and I know you've learned many this week, and I know it's been probably quite affirming to be in these seats. I wish that I had had something like this when I was coming along. I hope that you know how important it is for you to be strong and cemented in your own beliefs and what you will stand for in your career. It's really important, because there'll be forces coming in all ways sometimes for you. And you've got to be strong enough to navigate them, to navigate those winds. That's really, really important. So I hope that I've left you with that.
I'm going to start with Kayla and then hand it down.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Lesli. I'm Kayla Sharp with Full Government. You've shared several really great examples of stories that you've covered in support of your local community as a local journalist that have also connected with your life. And they were just such natural stories for you to connect those dots as you cover your community. I previously was an editor for Axios Local, where I also worked with reporters across different cities, covering issues related to the communities that also touched on their lives, whether it was somebody being diagnosed with COVID and dealing with long COVID symptoms and trying to find treatment in their area, or, having a child or getting married and talking about navigating childcare costs and daycare wait lists and navigating high wedding venue costs in the area. And I always love to find these really organic opportunities to connect personal experiences with the experiences of our readers. But as an editor, I also wanted to be able to maintain that like work-life balance and that separation from my reporters, and would always reach out to them and say like, hey, this was a great conversation and a great opportunity, but like if you don't want to talk about like your medical situation in like the newsletter, you don't have to. So I was wondering, how do you, especially as a local journalist, how do you find that balance between connecting your lived experiences with the reporting that you do, while also kind of maintaining your autonomy as an individual person outside of your life? And how do you recommend like maybe pushing back on, news directors, producers who really want you to dive into those experiences? And do you have any other insight to share on that?
Thank you for that question. I think I come back to something that another one of my mentors, Maureen Bunyan, once shared, and she was part of the first group of African-American journalists who fanned out across the country in the late 60s and early 70s after the Kerner Commission report came out, which essentially said that part of the problem we have in this country is Black people aren't seeing themselves in affirming positions. They aren't seeing themselves revealed in their full selves. And what Maureen taught me was that this thing that we do is your doing. It's not your being. And I have always worked to incorporate me into what I do, but I've also worked to make sure that there is some separation to your point about having balance. I think whenever there's an opportunity, though, to share a lived experience that may help people understand a story, and you're comfortable with it, I always see the value in it. Because what I always hear people say when they hear stories that I've shared personally about my own life or about my family or things that I know something about because I've had personal experiences with it, is they appreciate being seen. They appreciate not feeling like they're the only person navigating that journey. And I think it helps to build connections. Part of what we do as journalists is build connections with people so that people can see themselves or so that people can see others. So I think I've tried to do that. And also, when you talk about sort of the work-life balance, I think we have to create some parameters sometimes around the work that we're doing. I think what COVID exposed for all of us when people weren't working in newsrooms and people are working at home is that the work never stopped. And sometimes we have to say, I need to declare some space here between the work and between the life. So for me, I've tried to ensure that when I'm doing the work, I'm doing the work. And that when I'm not doing the work, I'm not doing the work. And sometimes that's hard to do because all the lines have been blurred, and we've got all this social media and we've got all these devices, and there's always something to do and something to report on. So I just try to, as Rachel said, be strategic. And part of the reason why I have to be strategic is because I have a daughter. And there was a moment when we were doing all this stuff with social media that she said, I hate social media. And I said, why? And she says, because it took you away from me. Because I was always, okay, I'm here. Because when you work at night, and that's the other thing, most people are at home, after 6 or 7 o'clock. I'm going home in between the shows to go, okay, let's eat. Okay, how was your day? Okay, what do we need? Okay, now I got to go back and do the 11 o'clock. And what was revealed to me that I didn't fully understand, and that came through my daughter, was she saw me engaging with her and then on my cell phone, engaging with her and then on my cell phone. And so I had to be better about creating boundaries around that time and holding space to be present. Being present is really, really important. And I learned a lesson about not being present in the worst possible way. So back in 2021, I was going to have ankle surgery. And we all knew I was going to have ankle surgery. And the one thing the doctor said to me before I came back was, whatever you do between July and December, don't fall. So 2 weeks before I'm supposed to have this surgery, not being present, not creating space, I'm walking my dog and I'm going home and I'm like, oh, my ankle hurts. I should really just go in. But no, Boomer, I really want to take a picture of you on the steps. So Boomer goes up on the steps and the person who's getting ready to have surgery in 2 weeks, bends down on the steps to take a picture of Boomer. And what happens? I'm falling. But I'm in my head, They said, don't fall. Like, don't fall before you come back. So I put my arm out to break the fall. No. And I break my wrist. So 2 weeks before this surgery, I end up having this surgery because I wasn't present and because I didn't honor my boundaries and because I didn't do what I said I was supposed to do, which is have that space between work and being present and life and all of that stuff. So I when you say that you listen to the people who report to you as an editor and you want to make sure that they have balance and all those things, it's really important that they do have balance, because sometimes when your life is imbalanced, these kinds of things can happen. And that's just a real world example.
Follow up, what kind of dog is Boomer, and was he helpful in this emergency situation?
He really was helpful in this emergency situation. He's what they call a Zushan, so he's a cross between a Shih Tzu and a Bichon Frise, so he's a little dog. I went back and looked at the video because everything's on video, and we have Ring camera video. And I fall down, and Boomer's kind of like, what's happening here? And he comes down, and I'm like, I fell. And I had to crawl up the stairs. But before I crawled up the stairs, I tried to call my husband on the phone. So I crawled over to my phone, and I tried to call my husband where he was on a Zoom call. So, when you're on a Zoom call, you can say, can I call you back? Or I can't. So my husband didn't realize I had fallen. So Boomer's on the ground with me, and we sort of like climb up the stairs together, right? And we get into the house, and then I sort of collapse on the floor from, the pain. But yeah, he did stay. He was a good dog. He was a good dog. Yeah, you can see more stories. He's a keeper.
Hi, my name is Keisha. First of all, this has been such an affirming discussion hearing from you. I just want to say thank you for that. I'll start by giving a really quick anecdote, then I'll get to my question. Earlier in my career, I spent a very short time, as an MMJ at a small market TV station. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I had a handful of viewers who truly on a weekly basis would send me the most hateful emails because of my hair. I was natural back then, still natural now. Some days it was easier to ignore it. Other days it was very, very hard to ignore that. So my question is, how do you teach yourself or train yourself to not internalize hate that comes your way from the audience that you simply want to inform?
Well, let me just say, I'm sorry that you had that experience. And I just want to tell you, you are beautiful just the way you are. And I understand the decisions that we make, because what happens is you have consultants that come in and they tell you you should look a certain way. And then your bosses tell you your hair should be a certain way. And then there's that added pressure of trying to be something that you're not, that nobody else has to navigate but us. So from the outset, we come in with this expectation that we can't meet because it's not realistic. And so for a lot of us, you made the choice to wear your hair natural, but a lot of us have chosen to do other things because we think that makes us more marketable, more credible, more acceptable. And it's an unfortunate road to have to walk. What I do think, and this is why I said to you, you've got to spend time really making sure that your scaffolding is strong. At the end of the day, what these folks say doesn't matter, but I know it wears on the soul. And I know from my own experience, because as you'll hear if you're able to watch the Crown Act story, it was Black women who were calling me saying your hair is not straight enough. Black women in Washington don't wear their hair this way. And so I'm not going to lie, it hurts, it penetrates. But that's when we have to make sure that we are so strong on the inside that we're giving ourselves and feeding ourselves affirming messages, because the most important messages that we get are the ones that we give ourselves. And really, for these other people, you just need to pray for them. And I think the other tactical thing you can do is use that experience as a teaching experience for the people that you're working for and the people that you're working with. This is a moment when you can really advocate and say, this is an experience, a singular experience I'm having because of something that is an extension of who I am. If we say that we want to be an inclusive environment, that we cover this community, all of it, then we have to acknowledge that all of us have different lived experiences. All of us don't choose to wear our hair the same way, right? And good for you for being able to kind of silence that hate. It's not going to end it, right? You can't stop people from expressing the worst parts of themselves, but you can certainly work on being the best version of yourself so that when you hear that and when it comes your way, just sort of brush it off your shoulder.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation. And I don't have a question. I just also wanted to join in on the thanks. I'm from India. I grew up there. And as a kid, I was bullied for being dark-skinned. And we can talk about internalized racism. We've definitely talked about it within our group. But when I moved to America, I think my identity shifted from being a dark-skinned girl to a woman of color. And I just wanted to thank you for the conversations you are having and like putting it out there because it helps women like me, you know? Sorry, I don't have my personal infrastructure together, but yeah, it gives me language to deconstruct and, you know, find myself again. So thank you.
You know, I'm really glad you shared that. You know, colorism in this country is a real thing. And much in the same way that you're talking about your experience as an Indian American woman right here in this country, it is not different from the experience of African Americans here, because in our own communities, and it's something that, you know, it's so frustrating. When I look at my own family, my mother is much browner than me. My grandmother is much lighter than me. I'm sort of right in the middle. And so I grew up really struggling with this idea of why people had issues around colorism. They would say things to me like, oh, you think you're better because you're light-skinned with long hair. No, you think I'm better. That has nothing to do, what you just said to me has nothing to do with me. And I say all that to say that, you know, it's unfortunate that we are still having these issues. There is a great book out right now that I tell people is required reading by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste. And Isabel Wilkerson spends about a decade researching her books. And is it Aditi? Aditi, such a beautiful name and a beautiful woman. She writes quite a bit about her experience about caste and learning about caste in India. And we know that skin color in this country and around the world hasn't just been a divisive thing. It has been a pipeway to prosperity or not. It has determined whether someone gets a job or not. It informs how people treat people or not. And so it is not a minute little thing. It is deep. It is deeply hurtful. You know, we talk about this as a family because we don't all look the same. My daughter is browner than me. And so I have very little tolerance for colorism. I call it out when I see it. I hate that it has the effect of producing what you just said, which is sort of dismantling to the soul in a lot of ways. But I think when we have really courageous and honest conversations, and this gets back to why I think it's so important to be authentic about our life experiences and bringing those voices to our experiences, is because we can help people understand how this feels, how it feels when someone makes a callous statement, how it feels when someone makes a decision based on something we literally cannot control, right? I remember when I did a commentary about Gabby Douglas. And this was after she had won the gold medal. And people were talking about her hair at the time and how they thought her hair, that the terms people were using to describe it were very derogatory. And I remember at the end of it being in tears, and it wasn't my experience exactly, but I understood the inhumanity around it. And I understood how it felt. And so while I have not walked in your walk, Aditi, I understand what you're talking about because I know what it does to the soul. And I just want to tell you that you are enough just the way you are. And that you got to believe that. And I know that there are cultural forces, right, that we can't always upend, right? We can't upend thousands of years of history and belief around colorism and around the caste system, but we can control how we manage us. And so I hope for you that the awakening, and the awakening for all of us, is that everybody has something they go through. We all have things culturally that become part of our DNA. We all have things that we deal with in our respective communities. And if we could just be a little more understanding and help people understand what this feels like, I think it might help to shift things sometimes, right? I'm thinking about the experience of going back and chronicling the journey of Scotland. Part of the story of Scotland is in the 1960s, there was a young Jewish mother whose daughter came home and said something that she had never heard in their household. And she said to her, I can't be late because if I'm late, I have to be with the stinky N-words. And so her mom said, we don't talk this way in our house. What are you talking about? As she goes to the community of Scotland and she sees that the people in Scotland are living in squalor. There are homes with no windows. There is one water pump. They have to cross the street to get water. There are no paved roads. There is no trash. There is no sewage. There are no water pipes bringing the basic services that she has to this community. And so this young Jewish mother goes to the community and she becomes friends with the matriarchs. She becomes friends with the community, and they work together to create an interfaith, interracial effort to save Scotland, which ultimately ends up with this community having a modern townhome community. And there are lots of stories to tell around this. The promise of what it could have become didn't become, right? It didn't become all that it could have because there were forces that still today that are creating issues. But your experience, right? And the experience that this mother had, and the experience that someone else may have, to go and see the experience of others and want to do something to inform themselves and to help them. I'm saying to you that your experience can help somebody. Your experience can help another beautiful Indian young woman who is grappling with these same feelings, can help the next person who might say something that is ignorant and uninformed, but for understanding what your journey is like. So I think that the work that we do requires us in so many ways to bring our full selves to work so that we can help not just educate the people that we work with, the people that we engage with, the people that we cover, to understand each other differently. If we understood, I think, each other better, if we understood our life experiences better, I think we would be better to each other. And I think we all have a responsibility to leave people better than we found them. And part of the way that we do that is by helping them understand what our journey is like too. So don't feel like you have to extrapolate the two. You're not a robot. You're a feeling human being. And I think if we're able to reach people and really get to the heart of people, then I think we'll be able to help people understand people and what we deal with better.
Leslie, we could keep you here all day, but I know we have one more question, and if there are any other urgent ones, but need to wrap it up here.
Hi, I'm Amber Castillo. I'm a community reporter at a local news outlet, Epicenter NYC. Thank you so much for this empowering conversation and just encouraging the kind of emotional honesty that is a part of knowing ourselves. I had a question about just that, about knowing ourselves. And sometimes to me, it feels like an amorphous thing. Like you go through these experiences and you internalize them and you develop these values and you're strong and you just know yourself. So I'm curious if there are any concrete ways you've gone about knowing yourself and articulating that narrative to yourself and then to others, and when and how you go about revising that narrative of your journey.
Well, narratives are really important. And so what we tell ourselves sort of becomes who we are. And for me, I think I started to unlock my voice with a really great consultant that came to the station. And I wouldn't say that most consultants were all that good because they all said the same thing: wear your hair this way, put this dress on, talk like this, do. But this woman was different, and she saw something in me that I hadn't fully unlocked at the time, which was this sort of emotional intelligence and a willingness to be vulnerable and brave in ways that she hadn't really seen before and I hadn't fully tapped into. So she said, well, what if you brought that with you into every story, into every engagement? What if you brought you fully into your stories and experiences? What might that do? And so we started to kind of sit down and figure out, well, what does bringing your full self sound like? What does your bringing your full self look like? What does your full self, bringing your full self mean in the way that you govern yourself, in the way that you allow people to speak to you, in the way that you allow people to treat you? And ultimately, and I think this is really important, people treat you, we teach people how to treat us. And so when we think that we are not being treated well, we have to teach them a different way. We have to give them new language. So I think, to your point about narrative, I think it's telling yourself really good things, but also having the agency. When someone says something to you or does something to you that doesn't honor you, having the words and the intention to say, I want to help you here because this is actually not appropriate. We don't talk to each other this way. Or doesn't align with my spirit, right? The way that you're speaking to me doesn't align with the way that I see myself. So we need new words to figure out how to connect with each other. We need some person-first language. And let me help you understand what it is. Here's what we're not going to do. Or here's how you will speak to me. Or here's how we're going to affirm our relationship going forward. These are things we have to teach people, right, on the journey. These aren't things that we knew when we were young Leslie meeting Rachel. These are things that we can learn from the Rachels of the world who have found those words and know these narratives and have figured out how to work them into our journey. So I think we start by building from the inside out, but then sometimes we have to build from the outside too, to say, this foundation is how it is. What you're not going to do is put that brick on here. What you're not going to do is lay that flooring. What you're not going to do is try to put in those lights or dim my light because of what's happening with you. And so I think we can teach people, right, by understanding how strong we are and how we want we want people to treat us.
Another thing I wish for everyone in this room is that you live long enough to learn from your mentee, to be inspired by your mentee, to be honored by the fact that you can say that you know this person. And so when I said we would end on a high note, I can't think of a better way to close out this fellowship by saying thank you, Lesli Foster, for sharing your authentic self with us. Let's show her how much we... And that concludes the 2024 Widening the Pipeline Fellowship. One more time, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Evelyn Y. Davis Foundation and Lenovo. I'd like to thank all of you for taking times out of your busy lives and schedules to come and benefit from the training and the guidance that National Press Foundation offers to young journalists like you. So I want you to go back into your newsrooms and take these messages to heart and take them to your communities.